There are disappearances that make people believe nature itself has swallowed the victim whole. That vast deserts, endless forests, or deep, silent canyons quietly erased a human life, as if it had never existed at all. But there are also cases where the truth is not hidden in darkness. It does not lie at the bottom of a ravine. It is not buried beneath scorching sand or lost to time. The truth stands in plain sight, wearing a neatly pressed uniform, a polished badge pinned to the chest, using a calm, reassuring voice to lull the most desperate people into trust. On November 15th, 2023, Amanda Wilson, 23 years old, vanished along Echo Canyon, a popular hiking trail in Arizona. There was no scream for help, no sign of a struggle, not a single clue suggesting she was in danger. For months afterward, hundreds of volunteers combed every stretch of dry, unforgiving ground. Her family lived inside a state of waiting so long and so heavy it became exhausting to breathe. And beside them, there was always one man, a young police officer with tired eyes and unwavering resolve. A former boyfriend who never stopped promising that he would not give up. He was hope, the final anchor for people standing at the edge of collapse. Until 7 months later, a sweltering afternoon at the Nalas border crossing between the United States and Mexico. An old taxi screeched to a halt. A thin young woman burst into the crowd, her eyes wide with terror, like an animal cornered with no escape, screaming with everything she had left. She did not ask for water. She did not ask for a doctor. She asked for protection. In her trembling hand was a badge from the United States Police. And in that moment, the entire story turned inside out. Amanda Wilson was still alive, but the man who had created the hell that imprisoned her for 7 months was the very person who had promised her family he would save her at any cost. The question was no longer how Amanda disappeared. It was how one person could wear the mask of a hero and use it to conceal the most ruthless crime of all. And this is the story we will follow, step by step, into the darkness of trust betrayed. Before the name Amanda Wilson ever appeared on missing person bulletins, she was just another young woman among tens of thousands of students at the University of Arizona. Not someone who stood out, not loud, not attention-seeking, but inside her was a quiet inner world, thoughtful and deeply kind toward others. Amanda was 23 years old, majoring in sociology, a field that promised little money but reflected exactly who she was. Friends say Amanda believed that if you truly understood another person's pain, you could help them heal. She often said that society does not lack strong people, but it desperately lacks people willing to listen. Life was not easy for Amanda. During the day, she attended classes. At night, she worked as a waitress at the Dusty Spoon Diner, a small but constantly busy restaurant in Tucson. Long shifts that stretched late into the night left her exhausted, but Amanda rarely complained. She saved every dollar in tips for tuition, textbooks, and a dream she refused to let go of. Co-workers remember her as a girl who always smiled, even when fatigue lingered in her eyes. After work, while others gathered to laugh and unwind, Amanda often sat quietly at a corner table, reading textbooks, jotting down thoughts about human behavior, about control, about the fragile line between love and possession. There was one thing few people knew. Amanda had just come out of a painful breakup. Brian Walker, her former boyfriend, was a young deputy sheriff, well regarded by colleagues and seen as someone with a promising future in law enforcement. To outsiders, they had looked like the perfect couple, a gentle college student and a dedicated police officer, often appearing together at family gatherings, easy to admire from a distance. But behind closed doors, the air slowly grew suffocating. Amanda began to feel watched more than cared for. Brian always wanted to know where she was going, who she was seeing, and why. He called it concern. Amanda called it the loss of freedom. Small arguments accumulated into a widening gap. And in August of 2023, Amanda made a decision that would send her life in a direction no one could have predicted. She ended the relationship. For Amanda, it was a necessary step to protect herself. She wanted to focus on her education, her future, and most importantly, to reclaim the feeling of control over her own life. But for Brian, her leaving was not the choice of an independent woman. In his mind, it was betrayal. It was the loss of control. After the breakup, Amanda tried to rebuild her routine. She chose short weekend hikes as a way to calm her thoughts. Nature made her feel safe, free, and briefly distant from the weight she carried inside. And it was that belief that the world was still a safe place, that the people she had once loved would never harm her, that led Amanda to Echo Canyon on that fateful morning. She had no idea that the greatest danger of her life was not waiting in the shadows of the rocky cliffs. It had already been part of her world for a long time, wearing the face of someone she once trusted completely. On the morning of November 15th, 2023, Tucson woke up to a rare sense of comfort. Cool air drifted through the quiet suburban streets, and the sky was a clear, uninterrupted blue. For Amanda Wilson, it felt like a morning of release, as if the city itself was giving her room to breathe after months of exhaustion. At around 7 in the morning, Amanda locked the door of her rented apartment. She wore light hiking clothes, carried a small backpack, water, and her phone. According to her roommate, Amanda seemed happier than usual. She said that just a few hours walking in nature would be enough to sort through the chaos in her mind. Her destination was Echo Canyon, part of Chiricahua, a national monument, a place locals poetically call the land of standing stone columns. It is a natural maze formed from volcanic ash millions of years ago, both breathtaking and eerily silent. Amanda chose the Echo Canyon Loop Trail, a route roughly 3.5 miles long, popular with visitors and considered safe if hikers stayed on the path. At around 8:20 in the morning, Amanda sent a short message to her parents in Phoenix. She said she was about to enter an area with no cell service and would call once she was back. The message was so ordinary that no one imagined it would become her final greeting for the next 7 months. According to later data, there were no further communications from Amanda's phone. As the sun slowly tilted westward and shadows crept across the red rock walls of Echo Canyon, her family still believed she was simply running late. But by evening, her phone went completely silent. No calls, no messages, no sign that she was on her way home. The next morning, when Amanda failed to show up for her shift at the Dusty Spoon Diner, the manager immediately contacted her family. Unease quickly turned into panic. At around 10 in the morning on November 16th, a park ranger on routine patrol discovered Amanda's car still parked at the Echo Canyon trailhead. The doors were locked. The interior was neat. On the back seat lay her college notes on social psychology and a carefully folded change of clothes. There were no signs of a struggle. Nothing appeared hastily abandoned. Everything suggested that Amanda had left her car calmly, just like any other hiker. And that normality was what made it terrifying. No one had seen Amanda return. No one remembered passing her on the trail. No camera captured anything out of the ordinary. It was as if she had stepped into Echo Canyon and been swallowed whole, without leaving behind so much as a breath. Search teams were deployed that same day. They combed every branch of the trail, every crevice, every deep hollow where someone might have slipped and fallen. But Echo Canyon remained coldly silent. No dropped water bottle, no scraps of fabric, no footprints leading out of the area. With every passing hour, the question grew heavier. How could a young woman vanish in broad daylight on a well-traveled trail without leaving a single trace? And while all eyes focused on the cliffs and the dark, yawning ravines, no one realized that the answer to Amanda's disappearance was not hidden inside Echo Canyon at all. It had been close from the very beginning, walking beside her that morning, quietly sharing the path she believed was safe. Immediately after Amanda Wilson's car was found at the Echo Canyon parking area, a large-scale search operation was launched. The Cochise County Sheriff's Office coordinated with park rangers, rescue teams, and hundreds of local volunteers. People who had never known Amanda showed up at dawn, carrying water, maps, and a fragile hope that the young woman had simply lost her way. The Arizona desert is not a place that yields easily. The harsh terrain, narrow rock crevices, sheer cliff faces, and hardened ground made the use of helicopters or drones severely limited. Search teams were forced to move on foot, step by step, carefully scanning every hollow, every patch of shade where an exhausted person might have collapsed. At the center of the entire operation stood one man, Brian Walker. Brian was a young deputy sheriff in the county, known among colleagues as serious, disciplined, and deeply committed to his duty. When news of Amanda's disappearance spread, he appeared almost immediately. No one had to ask. No official assignment was issued. Brian volunteered on his own, explaining that he knew Amanda better than anyone else. Those who were present later recalled that Brian worked without rest. He led the most difficult search teams, pushing through dangerous trails, willing to go beyond established safety limits. His face was hollow, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. The image was powerful, a man grieving the loss of someone he loved, yet placing duty above personal pain. For Amanda's family, Brian became their only emotional anchor. He regularly updated them on the search, reassuring her parents that there were no signs pointing to the worst. Brian told them Amanda was careful, that she knew how to find shade, how to ration water, and that he believed she still had a chance to survive. Those words, delivered in the calm, steady tone of a police officer, carried more weight than any comfort offered by others. Amanda's family believed him. The volunteers believed him. And the wider community believed that Brian Walker embodied responsibility and loyalty. The first week passed. More than 20 square miles of terrain were searched. Tracking dogs were brought in from neighboring counties, but they struggled to hold a scent in the dry air and rocky ground. No water bottle was found, no earbuds, no scraps of clothing. Echo Canyon remained brutally silent. As early theories of an accident began to lose credibility, another line of thought quietly emerged. Echo Canyon lay only a few dozen miles from the Mexican border. The area had long been known as a corridor for human trafficking activity. Behind closed doors, the possibility that Amanda had been abducted began to surface. Brian Walker was the first to voice this theory. He spoke with just enough gravity to avoid panic, but enough to plant fear. He emphasized the dangers of the border region and stated that the possibility of Amanda being a random target could not be ruled out. In the days that followed, the search operation slowly lost its initial momentum. Fewer volunteers showed up. Media attention drifted toward newer cases. But Brian remained. He appeared every day. He continued to say that he had not given up. In the eyes of the community, he became a symbol of perseverance. No one questioned him. No one doubted him. No one could imagine that while the entire community was looking toward Echo Canyon, convinced the mystery lay somewhere among the blazing red cliffs, the real answer was standing right among them. Calm, dedicated, and wearing the badge of the law. While all of Arizona believed that Amanda Wilson had been swallowed by the desert, more than 100 kilometers to the south, she was still alive. Not chained, not locked inside a dungeon, but imprisoned in something far more sophisticated. A prison with no bars, only fear. The house stood on the outskirts of the town of Magdalena de Quino in the Mexican state of Sonora. A modest one-story building with white walls and a low roof, sitting quietly among hot sand and cactus. To outsiders, it was nothing more than a temporary rental, indistinguishable from hundreds of other homes. But to Amanda, it became her entire world for 7 months. From the very first day, Brian Walker set the rules. The windows had to stay shut. The curtains always drawn. She was not allowed to step outside, not even once. She was forbidden to speak to anyone, not even through the fence. He told her that cartel informants were everywhere, that a single misplaced glance could cost her entire family their lives. Brian never needed physical violence. He used information, and he was the only one who controlled it. Every weekend, Brian arrived with supplies: bottled water, canned food, a few English-language books. But what he brought most of all was news. Printed clippings claiming the search had been called off. Articles stating that Amanda had been officially declared permanently missing. Even short reports saying her parents had been forced to leave Phoenix because of threats. All of it was fake, but Amanda did not know that. Completely cut off from the outside world, she had no way to verify anything. Brian became the only voice of reality. He was the messenger, the protector, and the sole barrier between her and the death he constantly painted in her mind. The temperature inside the house regularly climbed beyond what the body could tolerate. Days were scorching, nights were suffocating and terrifyingly silent. Amanda lived in a state of constant tension. Every sound outside made her heart tighten. Every passing car was explained by Brian as surveillance. Slowly, Amanda learned how to make herself smaller. She ate less to conserve supplies. She drank less water to survive. She spoke less to avoid provoking Brian's anger. She began marking time with faint pencil lines inside books. Not emotional diary entries, but dry, factual notes. What day it was, what time Brian arrived, whether it was hot or cold, how much water she drank. Those records were not meant for memory. They were the only way Amanda could convince herself that time was still moving. Brian called everything a safety measure. He said this was a secret operation, that Amanda was now part of a mission, that her sacrifice would save many lives. When Amanda cried, he called it weakness. When she questioned him, he called it dangerous. Gradually, Amanda could no longer tell where her own fear ended and where Brian's manipulation began. She came to believe the American police had been bought off. She believed that if she returned, she would be killed at the border. She believed that Brian was the only person truly on her side. 7 months passed in that state. 7 months without freedom. 7 months without light. 7 months sustained by fear, carefully fed day after day. While the world believed Amanda had vanished, in reality, she was being slowly erased from herself. And the man behind her disappearance continued to return to Arizona each week, putting on his police uniform, resuming the role of the tireless hero. No one knew that inside that quiet house, a young mind was being bent piece by piece. And no one imagined that a single small mistake by the man in control would open the only path Amanda had left to reclaim her life. Time did not only wear down Amanda Wilson, it also began to fracture the very man who had built the false world she was trapped inside. By June of 2024, Brian Walker was no longer the calm, controlled figure he once appeared to be. His weekend visits grew erratic. Sometimes he arrived earlier than usual. Other times, he skipped an entire week, then returned visibly tense, bordering on unstable. Amanda noticed the change in the smallest details. The way his hands trembled as he set the supply bag on the table. The way his eyes kept darting toward the windows. The sharp edge in his voice, even when there was no reason for it. Brian started talking more and more about threats. The cartel was getting closer. People were watching the town. They were no longer safe here. They had to prepare to leave. They had to find somewhere more hidden, farther away, more isolated. To Amanda, those words no longer sounded like protection. They sounded like a sentence. After 7 months inside the sweltering house, cut off from the world, the thought of disappearing all over again filled Amanda with panic. She no longer had the strength to keep running from an enemy she could not see. But Brian did not recognize that, or perhaps he refused to. In his mind, the plan had to continue. Control could not be allowed to slip away. Brian's anger became unpredictable. He snapped over small things. A can of food placed in the wrong spot. A book not returned to its exact position. In those moments, Amanda went completely silent. She had learned that resistance only made everything worse. But within that silence, something else began to take shape. Amanda started to observe, not like a victim, but like someone trying to understand the system that held her captive. She paid attention to when Brian arrived and when he left. She memorized what he brought with him. She noticed that not everything in the house was as tightly secured as he had always claimed. And then, one evening, when Brian left in a more frantic state than usual, he made the only mistake he had made in 7 months of control. A drawer in the old wooden table in the living room was left behind, not fully closed. Amanda had not planned to open it, at least not at first. But the unease inside the dark house that night was overwhelming. She stepped closer, her heart pounding, as if one small movement could cause the entire world to collapse. Inside the drawer, among scattered papers and clutter, Amanda saw a dull piece of metal under the weak light. She picked it up with trembling hands. It was a police badge, Brian's badge, not a replica, not a symbolic token, a real badge. In that moment, something inside Amanda shifted. Not full clarity, but a crack. A small opening in the story Brian had built over 7 months. If this was a secret mission, if Brian was the only one with power, why would he leave this behind? And why, in all his warnings about danger, had he never told her she was allowed to have it? For the first time in a long while, Amanda asked herself whether her fear truly came from the outside world or whether it had been carefully cultivated inside this house. She held the badge for a long time, not as a symbol of authority, but as evidence, something that did not belong in Brian's narrative. And its very existence made Amanda realize that if Brian could lie about one thing, he could be lying about everything. That night, Amanda did not sleep. She sat in the darkness, allowing herself, for the first time, to consider a possibility she had never dared to touch before. That the outside world might not be as dangerous as Brian claimed, and that the greatest threat might be much closer than she had believed. The awakening did not come with screams. It came in silence, and it marked the end of her role as a passive victim. Amanda Wilson began preparing for something she had never believed she had the strength to do, to escape, even if she had only one chance. In the early hours of June 20th, 2024, the town of Magdalena de Quino was still buried in the heavy sleep of the desert. The sky had not yet begun to change color. The air stood still, hot and dense, as if the night itself refused to make room for life. Inside the small house on the edge of town, Amanda Wilson stood motionless in the darkness. She carried no luggage. She had no long-term plan. The only thing she possessed was an irreversible decision. If she did not leave at that moment, she knew she would disappear forever. The front door was secured by a system Brian had carefully designed. Amanda had tested it dozens of times in her mind, but there was no hope there. The only way out was a small bathroom window, set high near the ceiling, a space Brian believed no adult body could possibly fit through. Amanda dragged a wooden chair closer. Her hands trembled from exhaustion and fear. Using an old metal spoon as a lever, she slowly pried at the window frame, dried and cracked from months of relentless heat. Every faint sound made her heart seize. She stopped again and again, listening, afraid the familiar sound of a car would appear on the road outside. 40 minutes passed like hours. When the final section of the frame gave way, sharp splinters cut into her hands. Blood seeped out, but Amanda did not dare make a sound. She squeezed through the narrow opening, her thin body scraping hard against the wall, then dropped onto the solid ground behind the house. She stood still for a few seconds, gasping for air, feeling a fragile sense of freedom for the first time in 7 months. She wore oversized men's clothing. In her hand was the cold weight of a police badge, the only thing she believed might save her if she was discovered. Amanda began to walk, not run, just fast enough. She avoided streetlights, moved through cactus and jagged stones. The Sonoran Desert at night is not loud. It is cruelly silent. Every step made her fear she was leaving a trail behind. She walked nearly 2 miles before her body began to give out. Her head spun. Every sound behind her made her turn in panic. In her mind, Brian appeared in every dark corner, the familiar car rushing toward her, the dream of freedom shattering in an instant. When Amanda finally saw the main road leading north, her knees nearly buckled, and at that exact moment, an old taxi slowed along the shoulder. The driver was an older man, his weathered face marked by a lifetime spent near the border. Amanda burst out of the darkness and raised her hand. The man slammed on the brakes. When the door opened, he froze at the sight before him. A thin young woman, hair tangled, eyes red with terror, as if she had stepped straight out of a nightmare. Amanda had no money. Her Spanish came out broken and uneven, but in that moment, survival instinct took over. She raised the badge, clutched it tightly, and in a trembling but determined voice, said she was an American agent being hunted by a cartel. The driver did not understand every word, but he understood the fear in her eyes. In this land, the word cartel alone was enough to silence questions. He opened the door. He did not ask for payment. He did not ask anything else. The taxi headed toward the border. Throughout the long drive, Amanda never took her eyes off the rearview mirror. Every passing vehicle made her hold her breath. She was no longer playing a role. She was just a human being trying to survive. When the American flag came into view in the early light of day, Amanda did not cry. She had no tears left. She stepped out of the car, her legs trembling, carrying both fear and a fragile hope. That escape was not just a journey across the desert. It was the moment Amanda Wilson stepped out of the invisible prison that had held her for 7 months. And it was also the moment the truth began to catch up with the man who believed he could hide it forever. By midday on June 20th, 2024, the Nalas border crossing was drowning in blistering heat. Waves of warmth rose from the asphalt, making the air shimmer, mixing with the smell of exhaust and the constant fatigue of border officers accustomed to the same repetitive inspections day after day. No one there was prepared for the moment that would change the course of a case most believed had already faded into obscurity. An old taxi came to an abrupt stop, cutting past the long line of waiting vehicles. Before the driver could say a word, the back door flew open. A young woman stumbled out, barely able to keep her balance. She was so thin that the lines of her face looked sharp and harsh, her skin darkened by the sun, her clothes hanging loose, as if they did not belong to her body. The border officers tensed immediately. Hands moved instinctively toward their belts. But the woman carried no weapon. She had only panic in her eyes and a scream torn from deep in her lungs. She spoke in English, her voice hoarse, almost breaking into sobs. "Please protect me. They are watching me." She did not ask for water. She did not ask for medical help. She asked to be safe. As officers closed in, she slowly opened a fist she had been clutching tight. In her scraped, sweat-soaked palm lay a United States police badge, heavy and cold. She said she was an undercover agent, that the mission had failed, that the cartel would kill her entire family if they knew she had surfaced. Her words came out disjointed, lacking clear logic. But the fear could not be faked. The look in her eyes was not the look of a con artist. It was the look of someone who had lived too long under the belief that she was being hunted. Amanda Wilson was immediately taken into an initial holding room. A doctor was called. Water was brought, but she could not keep the cup steady in her hands. Her entire body shook uncontrollably. When asked for her name, she hesitated. When asked about her family, she broke down, screaming that they could not be contacted, that any call would get them killed. When the identification process began, the room fell into a heavy silence. Fingerprint data appeared on the screen. An old photograph came up. A young woman with long hair, a fuller face, clear and unguarded eyes. Amanda Wilson, University of Arizona student, missing for 7 months. In that moment, the story officially changed direction. When she was told her identity had been confirmed, that her parents were still alive and waiting for news of their daughter every single day, Amanda did not feel the relief everyone expected. Instead, her panic deepened. She cried uncontrollably, repeating that she could not trust anyone, that the only person she could contact was her commanding officer. She said Brian's name. Medical staff documented disturbing physical signs: severe malnutrition, dehydration, old marks around her wrists, consistent with prolonged restriction of movement. But the most alarming damage was not on her skin. It was in the way she spoke, in every sentence shaped by the language of a mission that did not exist. When Amanda whispered that failure would bring retaliation against her family, no one in that room yet understood that they were witnessing the aftermath of 7 months of sustained psychological manipulation. A fabricated world so complete that the truth itself had become more terrifying than the lie. No one at the Nalas crossing realized at that moment that the badge in Amanda's hand, the very object that helped her cross the border, would also be the evidence that would bring down the carefully constructed image of a man the entire community respected. The truth had crossed the border with her, and there was no turning back. On the morning of June 21st, 2024, Tucson woke up like any other day. Early sunlight washed over quiet rows of houses. in a city where people still believed that the law existed to protect them from evil. No one on Oak Ridge Street knew that within just a few hours, one of those beliefs would collapse completely. While Amanda Wilson was being treated by doctors and federal agents at a hospital in Dallas, north of the border, a different plan was unfolding in silence. 6 unmarked SUVs rolled into a residential neighborhood one after another. No sirens, no flashing lights, only the cold precision of people long accustomed to confronting danger. Their target was Brian Walker, the man the community had believed for 7 months to be a symbol of dedication. The man who had comforted the victim's family, the man who had led search teams, and the same man who had built an invisible prison for the very woman he claimed he was trying to save. At exactly 7 in the morning, the front door of Brian's house opened. He stepped outside wearing a neatly pressed police uniform, a familiar travel mug in his hand. Everything looked painfully ordinary. He was preparing for another workday, ready to continue playing the role of the hero in the disappearance of Amanda Wilson. He did not make it more than 3 steps. A command to freeze cut through the quiet morning air. Brian paused for a brief moment, just long enough for the agents to close in. Seconds later, the man who once represented the law was face down on the hot pavement, his hands locked behind his back. No resistance, no shouting, not a single question about Amanda. Neighbors peeked through cracked doors, unable to understand what was happening. To them, Brian Walker was still the model police officer, the man who offered polite greetings every morning. But to federal agents, the picture had already changed completely. As Brian's home was searched, the pieces began to fall into place. Border records showed that his personal SUV had crossed the United States-Mexico border more than 30 times over 7 months. Nearly all of those trips took place on weekends, lining up precisely with the days Amanda was isolated in Sonora. Brian had previously explained that he traveled to Mexico for affordable medical care and to purchase medication for relatives. At the time, those explanations sounded reasonable. Placed alongside Amanda's testimony, they became paper-thin cover stories. Inside Brian's home office, investigators discovered a world built entirely on lies. Computers, printers, files containing fake news layouts, articles declaring Amanda dead, text printed for the sole purpose of planting fear. There were photographs as well. Amanda sitting and reading. Amanda staring out a window. Amanda growing thinner over time. All of them taken in silence, as if Brian had been documenting his own process of control. When Brian Walker was let out of that house, he was no longer a police officer, no longer a protector, only a man stripped of the mask he had worn for years. The truth spread quickly. Within hours, the Cochise County Sheriff's Office was thrown into shock. Colleagues who had worked beside Brian could not believe that the man they trusted was the one behind one of the most calculated abductions the region had ever seen. Justice did not arrive with applause. It arrived in heavy silence, and in the hollow eyes of a man who had just lost everything, as the world he built on lies finally collapsed. On June 24, 2024, inside an interrogation room at a federal building in Phoenix, Brian Walker sat across from investigators. He no longer wore a uniform. He no longer carried a badge. Yet his posture remained rigid, his gaze calm to the point of coldness, as if he still believed he was the only one holding the truth. During hours of questioning, Brian refused to admit to kidnapping. He described his actions as protection, as necessary, as the only possible choice in a world he believed had become corrupted. When asked why he never reported any so-called secret operation to his superiors, Brian replied that the system was rotten, that he could trust no one but himself. What unsettled investigators most was not his denial, but the way he spoke about Amanda. Not once did he refer to her as a victim. Not once did he show remorse when shown images of Amanda's emaciated condition at the border crossing. In his eyes, what had happened was merely the inevitable outcome of a plan that had not yet been completed. Criminal psychologists were brought in. Their analysis pointed to classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder combined with control-based delusions. For Brian, love could not exist without ownership. Amanda's decision to leave him in August of 2023 was not simply a breakup. It was the collapse of the self-image he had spent years constructing. In Brian's worldview, Amanda was never allowed to leave. She was an extension of his ego, proof of the heroic role he believed he was born to fulfill. When Amanda chose independence, Brian chose to rewrite reality. One detail brought the interrogation room to a heavy silence. Brian repeated the same line multiple times. When asked how he could watch someone he claimed to love deteriorate day by day inside a locked house, he answered in an even, emotionless voice. Everyone else saw walls and locks. I saw safety. There, no one could take her away from me. That statement was not a justification. It was a confession. In Brian Walker's mind, the house in Sonora was not a prison. It was the place where he finally achieved what he wanted most. Absolute possession. No competition. No choice. No outside world. Throughout the investigation, Brian never once asked about Amanda's physical condition or mental state. The only things that concerned him were how she escaped, who helped her, and how the security system he had built so carefully could have failed. To Brian, Amanda's escape was not an act of survival. It was betrayal. Proof, in his mind, that she had failed to understand the sacrifices he believed he had made. The trial that followed moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. Border crossing records, the concealed prison, fake media reports, witness testimony, and Amanda's fragmented but truthful account. When Brian Walker stood before the court, the hero's mask fell completely away. In the public eye, he was no longer a devoted police officer. He was simply a man who had confused love with possession, protection with destruction. And that confusion destroyed two lives. One belonging to the victim, and one belonging to a man who was certain he could never be wrong. On October 28, 2024, the federal courtroom in Tucson fell into silence as the judge read the final sentence. Brian Walker was sentenced to 45 years in prison with no possibility of parole. The charges went beyond kidnapping. They included abuse of power, unlawful confinement, and prolonged psychological torture. There was no cheering, no full sense of justice being satisfied, only a heavy weight settling over the room. Amanda Wilson did not attend the sentencing. She chose not to look at the man who had taken 7 months of her life. According to her attorney, Amanda was trying to rebuild something resembling a normal life, step by careful step. She returned to the University of Arizona, resuming the education she had been forced to abandon, but with a different purpose. She chose a path focused on helping victims of psychological abuse and isolation. Those close to her say Amanda still startles at the sound of police sirens. She avoids looking at uniforms. Some nights, she does not sleep at all, not because she fears the dark, but because silence feels too much like the house in Sonora once did. The police badge that helped save her life now rests in an FBI evidence locker. A small piece of metal carrying a much larger story. A story about how power can be distorted and how trust can become a set of invisible chains. The case of Amanda Wilson is not only the story of one dangerous man. It is a warning about a far more insidious form of evil. Evil does not always shout. It can speak softly. It does not always threaten. It can smile and promise protection. For 7 months, Brian Walker did not need physical violence to imprison Amanda. He used fear, isolation, and symbolic authority to bend another person's perception of reality. The most terrifying part was not the locked door. It was the manipulated belief that the prison was safety. Amanda survived, but not everyone does. This story reminds us that sometimes the greatest danger does not come from remote wilderness or unfamiliar darkness. It can enter our lives disguised as concern, as love twisted into control, as someone who insists they know what is best for us. And when control is called protection, when isolation is called safety, that is the moment freedom begins to be stolen, quietly, piece by piece, in silence.